My aunt wanted to control my money because she thought I didn't have any. The court investigator discovered I had more than her entire extended family combined. And the real question wasn't whether I could manage my finances, it was why my own family had been lying about me for 15 years. My name is Sloan Whitfield, I'm 31 years old, and until last Tuesday, my family believed I was a financial disaster waiting to happen, a cautionary tale they whispered about at holiday dinners and used to frighten their children into studying harder. Don't end up like Cousin Sloan, my Aunt Lorraine would tell her daughters. Dropped out of college, lives in a shoebox, drives a car older than she is. That's what happens when you don't take life seriously. What none of them knew, what I'd deliberately hidden for over a decade, was that I'd dropped out of college because I was already making more money than my professors. That shoebox apartment was a strategic choice in a building I owned. And my 2007 Honda Civic? I'd kept it because it reminded me of where I'd started. But when my grandmother passed away and left me $340,000, her entire estate, bypassing my mother and aunts entirely, suddenly my family's casual disdain transformed into something far more dangerous. They decided I needed to be protected from myself. They had no idea what they were about to discover. The guardianship petition arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, delivered by a process server who looked almost apologetic. In the matter of the conservatorship of Sloan Elizabeth Whitfield, the document read, "Petition for appointment of guardian of the estate." The petitioner was my Aunt Lorraine, supported by declarations from my mother, my Aunt Patricia, and my cousin Mackenzie. According to their sworn statements, I was financially incompetent, incapable of managing substantial assets, and at risk of squandering the family inheritance through poor decision-making. The evidence they'd compiled was almost impressive in its superficiality. Exhibit A, photos of my apartment building, a modest 3-story walk-up in a transitional neighborhood. Evidence of respondents' inability to secure appropriate housing despite available resources. Exhibit B, photos of my Honda Civic. Evidence of respondents' failure to maintain reliable transportation. Exhibit C, screenshots from my social media showing me at local restaurants and coffee shops. Evidence of respondents' frivolous spending patterns. Exhibit D, a declaration from my cousin Mackenzie claiming I admitted to not understanding investments at a family barbecue 3 years ago. I remembered that conversation. Mackenzie had been bragging about her husband's day trading success, and I'd smiled and said, "I don't really follow the stock market." What I hadn't said was that I didn't need to follow it. I had people who did that for me while I focused on the private equity fund I built from scratch. The petition requested that Aunt Lorraine be appointed guardian of my estate, with full authority to manage the $340,000 inheritance and any other assets that may be discovered during the investigation. That last phrase made me pause. They suspected there might be more. They just had no idea how much more. I'd started investing when I was 16 years old. My grandfather, my grandmother's husband, who passed away when I was 14, had been a quiet man who worked as an accountant for 40 years. He'd never made more than $60,000 annually, never drove a fancy car, never took extravagant vacations. But he'd taught me something my parents and aunts never understood. Wealth isn't about what you spend, he told me during our Sunday afternoon chess games. It's about what you keep. And what you grow. He'd left me $5,000 when he died, a small bequest that my mother had laughed at. What's a teenager going to do with $5,000? Probably blow it on clothes and concerts. Instead, I'd opened a brokerage account and bought my first stocks. Amazon at $178 per share. Apple at $24, pre-split. A small position in a company called Netflix that my research suggested had potential. By the time I was 18, that $5,000 had become $35,000. I enrolled in college because that's what everyone expected. But I found the business classes painfully slow, the finance professors outdated, and the career counselors clueless about the opportunities one was already pursuing. So I dropped out after my sophomore year. My family was horrified. My mother cried. My aunts clucked their tongues and predicted disaster. My cousin Mackenzie posted a passive-aggressive Facebook status about some people throwing their futures away. What none of them knew was that I dropped out because my portfolio had crossed $200,000 and I needed to focus full-time on what was becoming a serious operation. Over the next decade, I'd built Whitfield Capital Partners from a one-woman operation in my tiny apartment to a private investment fund managing $47 million in assets for 32 high-net-worth clients who value discretion above all else. My average annual return was 23.4%. My client waiting list was 14 months long. And my family thought I couldn't manage $340,000. I could have fought the petition immediately. One phone call to my attorney would have produced documentation that would have ended this farce before it began. But I'd spent 15 years watching my family dismiss me, pity me, and use me as their cautionary tale. 15 years of condescending comments at Thanksgiving. 15 years of my mother sighing about her struggling daughter, while her sisters nodded sympathetically. I wanted them to discover the truth in the most public, undeniable, impossible to explain away manner possible. So I hired a lawyer, not from my usual network of high-powered attorneys, but a young public defender named Marcus Webb who handled guardianship cases. He was good, ethical, and most importantly, he would ensure the process played out exactly as the law intended. "They're claiming you're financially incompetent," Marcus said, reviewing the petition. "The court will appoint an investigator to assess your situation. Are you sure you don't want to just submit your financial records now and end this?" "I want them to find out themselves," I said. "In court. On the record." Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He'd learned not to question clients who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. The court appointed a professional investigator named Douglas Hartwell, a former FBI financial crimes analyst who now worked as an independent court-appointed fiduciary. His job was to conduct a comprehensive review of my financial situation and report his findings to the judge. When Douglas called to schedule our first meeting, I could hear the routine boredom in his voice. He'd probably done hundreds of these investigations, typically involving elderly individuals or people with obvious impairments. A 31-year-old woman whose family thought she was bad with money was probably the least interesting case on his docket. That was about to change. Douglas arrived at my apartment on a Monday morning, briefcase in hand, wearing the expression of someone who expected this to take about an hour. "Ms. Whitfield," he said, glancing around my modest living room. "I appreciate you meeting with me. This should be fairly straightforward. I just need to review your financial accounts, income sources, and any documentation related to the inheritance in question." "Of course." I gestured to the dining table, where I'd arranged several folders. "I've prepared everything you'll need." He sat down and opened the first folder. I watched his face carefully. The initial expression was professional disinterest. Then confusion. Then something that looked like he'd misread a number and needed to check again. Then his eyes went wide. "This?" He looked up at me. "Is this accurate?" "Verified by our external auditors last quarter." Douglas set down the first folder and picked up the second. His face went through several more expressions: disbelief, reassessment, and finally something approaching professional admiration. "You manage a private investment fund. Whitfield Capital Partners. Founded 11 years ago. With 47 million in assets under management. 47.3, as of last Friday's close." Douglas leaned back in his chair and stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Ms. Whitfield, your aunt's petition claims you're financially incompetent. That you live in inadequate housing, drive an unreliable vehicle, and have demonstrated an inability to manage money. I'm aware of what the petition claims. Does your family know about any of this?" "No." "Why not?" I considered the question carefully. "Because they never asked. They assumed. And I learned a long time ago that my family isn't interested in who I actually am, only in who they've decided I should be." Douglas nodded slowly. "I have about 6 more hours of review to complete here, Ms. Whitfield. May I ask why you live the way you do? The apartment, the car, you could clearly afford much more." "This apartment is in a building I purchased 12 years ago for $180,000. It's now worth $2.3 million and generates $14,000 per month in rental income from the other units. The Honda gets me where I need to go and costs almost nothing to maintain. I don't spend money to impress people who aren't paying attention anyway." Douglas actually smiled. "Your grandfather taught you well." I felt a warmth in my chest. "You knew him?" "No. But I recognize his philosophy." He gestured at the folders. "This is how wealth is actually built. Quietly. Consistently. Without needing anyone else to notice." He spent the next 7 hours reviewing every document I had. Bank statements, brokerage accounts, fund performance reports, audit letters, client contracts. By the end, he had a complete picture of my financial life, and it was the opposite of everything my family believed. "The hearing is scheduled for next Thursday," Douglas said as he packed up his briefcase. "I'll submit my report to the judge 48 hours before. Your family will receive a copy at the same time. I'll be there." He paused at the door. "Ms. Whitfield, in 23 years of doing this work, I've never seen a guardianship petition this misguided. Your aunt is about to be very surprised." That's the idea. The Whitfield family arrived at the courthouse like an army preparing for battle. Aunt Lorraine wore her most authoritative suit, navy blue, gold buttons, the uniform of a woman who expected to be taken seriously. Aunt Patricia flanked her right side, clutching a folder of additional evidence she'd compiled. My mother stood slightly behind them, looking uncomfortable but resolute. Cousin Mackenzie had brought her husband, Bradley, a day trader who'd lost $80,000 last year but still considered himself a financial expert. He'd apparently been coaching Aunt Lorraine on what to look for in my records. I arrived alone, wearing jeans and a simple blouse. No power suit. No entourage. Just me and the truth. Sloane. Aunt Lorraine's voice was saccharine. I want you to know this isn't personal. We're doing this for your own good. Grandma would have wanted us to protect you. Grandma left me everything and you nothing, I replied calmly. I think her wishes were pretty clear. Lorraine's smile tightened. She was confused at the end. We all know that. She didn't understand what she was doing. She understood perfectly. I walked past them into the courtroom. Judge Henrietta Blackwell presided, a 60-year-old former corporate attorney known for her no-nonsense approach and zero tolerance for wasted time. She'd already reviewed Douglas's report. I could tell by the way she looked at my family as they settled into their seats. She looked like someone waiting for a punchline. This is a hearing on the petition of Lorraine Whitfield Chambers to be appointed guardian of the estate of Sloane Elizabeth Whitfield, the judge announced. Mr. Hartwell, you've submitted your investigation report. Please summarize your findings for the record. Douglas stood. Your Honor, I conducted a comprehensive review of Ms. Whitfield's financial situation over the course of 3 meetings and approximately 20 hours of document analysis. Aunt Lorraine nodded approvingly, clearly expecting validation of her concerns. The petitioner's claims are that the respondent is financially incompetent, lives in inadequate housing, maintains unreliable transportation, and would be unable to responsibly manage the $340,000 inheritance from her grandmother's estate. And your findings? Judge Blackwell asked. Douglas paused, a dramatic beat I suspected he'd been rehearsing. Your Honor, the petitioner is not merely mistaken. The petitioner's claims are so fundamentally disconnected from reality that I initially suspected I had been given the wrong case file. A murmur rippled through my family's side of the courtroom. Sloane Whitfield is not financially incompetent. She is the founder and managing partner of Whitfield Capital Partners, a private investment fund with $47.3 million in assets under management. Her personal net worth, excluding the fund, is approximately $8.2 million. Her average annual return over the past decade is 23.4%, which places her in the top 1% of fund managers nationwide. The silence was absolute. Aunt Lorraine's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. The inadequate housing referenced in the petition is an apartment in a building Ms. Whitfield purchased for $180,000 12 years ago. That building is now worth $2.3 million and generates $168,000 in annual rental income. The unreliable vehicle is a 2007 Honda Civic that Ms. Whitfield has chosen to keep despite having the means to purchase any car she wishes. Douglas turned to look directly at Aunt Lorraine. Ms. Whitfield doesn't live modestly because she can't afford better. She lives modestly because she understands, apparently unlike her family, that wealth is built through discipline, not display. He returned his attention to the judge. Your Honor, not only is there no basis for this guardianship petition, but I question the motives behind it. The petitioner stands to control a $340,000 inheritance while apparently having no knowledge whatsoever of the respondent's actual financial situation. Either the petitioner conducted no due diligence before filing, or, he paused, or the petitioner was more interested in accessing the inheritance than protecting it. This is ridiculous. Aunt Lorraine shot to her feet. She's lying. She's fabricated all of this. There's no way, a college dropout, living in that neighborhood, driving that car, Ms. Whitfield Chambers, you will sit down and control yourself, or I will have you removed from my courtroom. Judge Blackwell's voice could have frozen water. Mr. Hartwell's investigation is thorough and verified by independent auditors. The documentation is incontrovertible. Lorraine sat, her face crimson. I have a question for the respondent. The judge turned to me. Ms. Whitfield, why didn't you simply provide this information to your family and avoid this entire proceeding? I stood. Your Honor, my family has spent 15 years treating me as a failure, a cautionary tale, and a source of embarrassment. They've made assumptions about my life without ever asking a single question. When my grandmother passed away and left me her estate, bypassing her own daughters, they didn't consider that maybe she knew something they didn't. They immediately assumed I was incapable of handling the responsibility. I looked at Aunt Lorraine, at my mother, at all of them. I didn't hide my success from them. I simply stopped volunteering information to people who had already decided I was worthless. The fact that they filed a guardianship petition without doing even basic research proves exactly why I made that choice. Judge Blackwell nodded slowly. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Bar for review. Filing a guardianship petition without reasonable basis is not merely frivolous, it's potentially actionable. She gathered her papers. Ms. Whitfield, you're free to manage your grandmother's inheritance, and your $47 million fund, without interference. Court is adjourned. The aftermath was everything I'd anticipated and nothing I'd feared. Aunt Lorraine tried to approach me in the courthouse hallway, her expression oscillating between shock and something that might have been shame. "Sloan, we didn't know. How could we have known? You never said anything, you never asked." I kept walking. "In 15 years, not one of you ever asked what I actually did for a living. You just assumed." My mother caught my arm. "Sloan, please. We're family. We made a mistake. You tried to take legal control of my finances because you thought I was too stupid to manage money." I removed her hand gently. "That's not a mistake, Mom. That's contempt. That's 15 years of looking down on me finally turning into action. Your grandmother." Grandma knew exactly who I was. I felt the tears threatening but held them back. She was the only one who ever bothered to find out. That's why she left me everything and you nothing. Not because she was confused, because she saw clearly what none of you ever tried to see. I walked out of the courthouse and didn't look back. 3 months later, I received a letter from Mackenzie. Her husband Bradley's day trading had finally caught up with them. They'd lost their house, their savings, and were facing bankruptcy. She was writing to ask if I might consider helping family during a difficult time. I thought about it for a long time. Then I wrote back. "Mackenzie, 3 years ago, you told your children not to end up like Cousin Sloan. You testified in court that I was financially incompetent. You let your husband coach my aunt on how to take control of my money. Now you're asking me for help. Here, that's what I'm willing to offer. I'll pay for a certified financial planner to work with you and Bradley for 1 year. I'll cover the cost of a bankruptcy attorney if you need one. And I'll set up a small emergency fund for your children's education, because they didn't choose their parents, but I won't give you cash to manage yourselves. And I won't pretend the last 15 years didn't happen. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with accountability. Not for the guardianship, for the years of dismissal that led to it. Your cousin, whether you respect me or not." Sloan, last week, I finally traded in my Honda Civic. Not because I needed to prove anything, that chapter was closed. But because the car had 287,000 miles on it, the transmission was failing, and even my grandfather would have agreed it was time. I bought a 2-year-old Toyota Camry. Reliable. Practical. Nothing flashy. My grandfather would have approved. The same week, Whitfield Capital Partners crossed $50 million in assets under management. I celebrated by having dinner at my favorite neighborhood restaurant, the same place I'd been going for 10 years, where they still charge me $12 for the salmon special. The owner, Maria, asked how business was going. "Good," I said. "Really good." She didn't ask for details. She never had. That's why I kept coming back. My aunt tried to take control of my unstable finances. The court investigator found $47 million she never knew existed. My grandfather taught me that wealth isn't about what you spend, it's about what you keep and what you grow. He also taught me that the people who truly understand you don't need to be impressed. And the people who don't understand you aren't worth impressing anyway. That's the only inheritance that matters.